Remember the day you're at a fancy restaurant. The lights are dim, the menu doesn't show prices, and the waiter gently places a silver platter in front of you. A half-dozen oysters sitting on crushed ice, maybe with a lemon wedge for moral support. The price? Probably enough to cover a week's worth of groceries. But here's the kicker. Oysters weren't always the luxury appetizer they're made out to be today. In fact, once upon a time, they were the fast food of the poor. So how did these slimy little sea creatures go from cheap street snacks to symbols of wealth and decadence? How did oysters become a luxury dish? Let's find out right here on History of Food. Oysters have been on the human menu for thousands of years. Archaeologists have found ancient piles of shells known as middens left behind by coastal communities. Basically, the prehistoric version of takeout trash. For ancient people, oysters weren't fine dining, they were survival food. If you lived near the coast and didn't want to starve, you pried open a shell, slurped down the gooey insides, and went about your day. Fast forward to Roman times and suddenly oysters start getting a reputation. The Romans were obsessed with them. They even transported live oysters across the empire using special tanks filled with seawater. Imagine the effort. These were people who hadn't invented soap yet but were hauling shellfish across Europe like it was liquid gold. For the Roman elite, oysters were a delicacy, something you showed off at banquets, usually before getting stabbed in a political coup. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the oyster situation had flipped dramatically. In cities like London and New York, oysters were dirt cheap, literally cheaper than beef or bread. Street vendors sold them by the bucket, and everyone ate them. Workers, sailors, and families scraping by on tiny incomes. They were the fast food of the working class, the McDonald's of their day, except with more shell fragments stuck in your teeth. Back then, oyster beds were abundant. New York Harbor, for example, was once home to billions of oysters. Some estimates say half of the world's oyster population lived there. Fast forward to the oyster craze in the 19th century, it was wild. Restaurants dedicated entire menus to oysters, offering them in dozens of styles. They were considered a wholesome, hearty food, perfect for laborers and city dwellers who needed a quick meal. And because oysters were plentiful, nobody thought of them as fancy. They were the great equalizer, enjoyed by all classes. But here's where the story takes a turn. The oyster boom came with a dark side of overfishing and pollution. People ate oysters faster than the ocean could produce them. Meanwhile, industrial cities like New York were dumping sewage and garbage into the same waters where oysters grew. That's not exactly the cleanest supply chain. By the late 1800s, oyster populations were collapsing, and the once endless supply became dangerously scarce. Here's the funny thing about humans. When something becomes rare, we automatically assume it's valuable. Oysters, once the food of the masses, suddenly started climbing the social ladder. As wild oyster beds dwindled, prices went up. Wealthy people, never ones to miss a chance to flaunt exclusivity, claimed oysters as their own. What used to be pub grub transformed into a delicacy reserved for upscale restaurants and posh dinner parties. And of course, oysters had a little help from their reputation. For centuries, they were rumored to be an aphrodisiac. Casanova, the famous Italian lover, supposedly ate 50 oysters for breakfast to keep his romantic energy up. Whether that's true or just seafood propaganda, it gave oysters a certain mystique. If you're paying ridiculous prices for mollusks, it helps to believe they come with superpowers. By the 20th century, oysters had officially entered luxury status. They were no longer served in oyster saloons for the everyday worker. Instead, they appeared in fine dining establishments, paired with champagne or dry martinis. Think about it. You've got a briny little bite of the sea balanced by bubbles in a crystal glass. It's the culinary equivalent of wearing a tuxedo to eat finger food. This pairing wasn't just about flavor, it was about branding. Champagne and oysters became linked in the cultural imagination as things rich people do. It's not just about taste, it's about signaling. You're not just having a snack, you're having the snack of the elite. Today, oysters are making a bit of a comeback in more casual settings. Oyster bars are popping up in cities worldwide, and happy hour deals sometimes make them more accessible. But they've never quite returned to their 19th century status as cheap street food. Farming oysters has become a huge industry, and while it's helped restore supply, the image of oysters as luxury is here to stay. Interestingly, oyster farming also makes them one of the most sustainable seafood options. Oysters actually filter and clean the water they live in. They're like tiny, slimy environmentalists. So when you splurge on oysters, you can at least tell yourself you're saving the planet, one overpriced appetizer at a time. So why do oysters still command such high prices? Part of it is logistics. Harvesting, farming, and shipping fresh oysters isn't cheap. But honestly, a lot of it is marketing and psychology. Humans are wired to associate rarity with value. Once oysters left the realm of everyday food, they got rebranded as elite cuisine. And now restaurants keep that tradition alive. You're not just paying for the oyster, you're paying for the story, the atmosphere, and maybe the chance to feel like a Roman emperor or Casanova, even if just for a bite. Oysters have had quite the journey. From ancient survival food to Roman delicacy, from working-class street fare to luxury dining, they've reinvented themselves more times than Madonna. Their rise and fall, and rise again, say a lot about how we humans treat food. We don't just eat it. We attach meaning, status, and even mythology to it. So the next time you're staring down a plate of oysters on ice, remember, you're not just eating seafood. You're eating history, economics, and a little bit of hype. And if anyone asks why you just spent half your paycheck on shellfish, just smile and say, it's tradition. If you enjoyed this video, please check out our other bingeable channels. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution.